Hello, this is City Council Spotlight today with Willie Burnley Jr., Counselor at Large. I'm Sarah Fishman. How are you doing, Willie?
I'm doing A-OK on this overcast day.
Yes. Oh, that's very poetic. Did you do
Thank
that
you.
ahead?
No, I didn't, but I did go to school for writing and I used to write poetry. So it all comes to a head.
I knew you wrote. I didn't know you did poetry. Cool. All right. So, especially since you're a first term counselor, could we start with you, give you a little bio, professional time in Somerville kind of thing?
Yes. So hi, my name is Willie Burnley Jr. I am a newly elected Somerville City Councilor at large, meaning I represent the entire city. I first got to Somerville just several years ago, about 2016, after I graduated from Emerson College, and came here already as an organizer and activist who fell in love with the community because it's full of people who are very passionate about the space that they're in and how they can live their values. And unfortunately, as a renter, within my first lease term in Somerville, which is the first place I've ever had a lease, I got displaced when my rent skyrocketed one day. And without having an economic support system, I had to leave not only Somerville, but the state. And luckily enough for me, I was able to work my way back here and continue to fight for the things I believe in and to help create the Somerville I think that most Somervillians would like to see.
So, at the risk of thinking too linear on my part, how did you? I think you said you worked in a bakery to work your way back here. So, where was the bakery? Was it here or was it in California or where was
It
it?
was in California, yes. So I went back home, like slept on a floor in my mom's place. And yeah, we got like a job over, it was around Thanksgiving time. So I did like a rush seasonal position in a bakery in the back. And we just like packaged turkeys and stuffing and did that for about 12 hours a day.
Okay.
And yeah, it was very manual. Most of the people who were working there were people who had gotten out of prison or who were immigrants. And it reminded me of the community I came from in a lot of ways. And having those experiences, I think gives me a real investment in the idea of like second chances and especially economically. And that's what I hope to help proliferate our political space with.
So the reason I asked is that you were a union steward for Local 122 of the Teamsters, and that is, does that include food service workers? So I was trying to figure out if that there was a connection there or not. So how did you?
Well, yeah, so just a little bit more of my like professional background. After I came back to the state, I was lucky enough to join Elizabeth Warren's reelection campaign in 2018. And then 2 years later, I joined Senator Markey's reelection campaign in 2020. And as a part of Senator Markey's campaign, I was lucky enough to unionize. And we became the first statewide campaign in Massachusetts to ever unionize. And
So
that's where,
his campaign was unionized?
yes,
Wow. Never
yeah,
heard of that.
yeah, it was an interesting time. It was unprecedented for us. There was only actually one other case of this anywhere in the country before we did it, and it was I think it was Sherrod Brown's campaign in Ohio, and I was like, if only we could have been the first. But you know,
Well,
in the
it's still a major thing to do for a major, you know, federal
mhm.
candidate. So, okay. So was there something else you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to say that that's not where my love of unions started. My dad was in a union. He's a pipe fitter. When I was young, I remember seeing like teacher pickets, and when I was in college, I helped unionize my school's dining hall workers. So the value is pretty consistent, but I actually got the chance to live it a little bit closer to home 2 years ago.
So you ran at large. Now, of course, there were 3 open at large seats. 3 of the 4 were open, and that's kind of unusual. But still, you're a newcomer, and running for a ward is much easier than doing something citywide. So is it because you had this campaign experience with both the senators that you felt you could take that on, or how 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 did it work? And was it easy, relatively speaking, or
I mean, I wouldn't say it was easy. It's never easy to put yourself out there,
yeah.
and to, open yourself up to criticisms and to say, my ideas are better than the next person's ideas. And I think they align more with the communities. But I personally I felt as though Somerville could do more, and that there was a real appetite to do more across the length of our city. And as a renter who's had to move around many times, actually every year I've been in this state until last year, I've had to move. I just thought it made more sense for me to try to represent that experience, which is the most common experience of Somervillians. I mean, most of our city is renters, and at the time there was, I think, 1 counselor who was a renter, and I'm not even sure
who was that?
I mean, I know Will Umba was, but then as we were running that race, he got a house, so I don't even know if there was well, I guess Kristen Strezel was also a renter, maybe.
Yeah.
So there's very little representation of that lived experience right now on the council, and so I was glad to talk to people all across the city to see where they're at.
Okay, so I want to talk about mental health next, maybe. So at the last city council meeting at the end of May, you talked about your own background, your own struggles. Did you feel or need anything from the city or from a local organization that helped you or not?
Did I need anything from a local organization?
Was the city or some local organization helpful in getting you what you needed, the services that you wanted?
I mean, yes and no. So just a little bit of background on why I opened up at the last meeting. I thought it was incredibly important to talk about suicide prevention efforts and how the city could be doing more to reach out to folks who are at a breaking point in their own lives and need just a little bit of care and support in order to hold on. And there was an impetus for me doing that, which was the fact that the National Suicide Hotline, National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which has a really long number, 10 digits, was actually creating a shorter number for everyone to call, which is 988. And as far as I am aware, it's widely available in our state at the moment. So if anyone needs support, they can call 988. But I haven't gotten a lot of support in terms of the city, in terms of government. I was able to go to a local hospital and get prescribed antidepressants, which for me was a really important step in my own journey of healing, because I've probably unknowingly had like a pretty chronic depression since I was like an adolescent, maybe like 10. And it took me a long time to recognize that. It took me a long time to accept it. And it took me longer to figure out what were the ways that I could cope with that in a healthy way. And so being able to get that help was really instrumental for me.
It is so affirming to hear people who are in the public eye say something like that, because it destigmatizes it. It's a breath of fresh air, So I didn't know how much you had talked about it before or not, but I appreciated it. And that number. So did you submit the resolution? What was the resolution exactly?
Yeah, so I submitted a resolution that basically laid out why we need to be doing more about this as a community. because it's something that affects Somerville. It's something that affects all across the country and the world, obviously. And I asked our newest administration, the mayor, to make a public resource with this, to put it on the website, to make sure that we're listing out mental health resources that are offered in our community, and these numbers especially, because it's, in my view, it's the least we could possibly do, but it could save a life. And so that's really what I'm here to do.
Yeah, it gives me chills because just having the potential to do that for one person is a big deal. So the number is 988. My understanding is, yes, already here, but goes nationwide on July 16th.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So, all right. Well, that's good. Good.
Can I just say one more thing on that?
Of course.
Sorry, because it's
No, go.
as you noted, it's a really like impactful and emotional conversation for folks. But something I didn't get the chance to say when I ran for office, but I really wanted to, was that for those folks who are out there who, have trouble getting out of bed some days, who feel unmotivated or unwilling to go about their own lives, like, I get it. I've been there. I've had periods of, at one point, months where I was in that state. And I just want people to know that it can get better. People do care about you. You are not alone. And if you need help, all you have to do is ask, because there will be someone on the other side who welcomes you with open arms. And from there, your life is a big open oyster.
That's a very nice message. I mean, I think a lot of people either are or know a lot of people who have been or in this situation. So it can't be said too many times. So thank you for saying that again. So I want to talk about safe consumption sites now. So first of all, could you just explain what that is so everyone knows?
Absolutely. Safe consumption sites are spaces, community spaces that are filled with usually clinicians who support people who are drug users and ensure that they don't overdose. Some people also call them overdose prevention sites, and they're widely available outside of this country. There are many in Canada, in Europe, and other spaces across the world, but the United States has made it very difficult historically in establishing them. And in fact, now we have one in New York City that's been in operation for a few months, but Somerville is considering opening one up here in order to end overdose deaths in our community.
So I had trouble pinpointing this because I thought there was something going on in Rhode Island too. And I don't want to focus too much on the locale as opposed to the idea, but is that true? Is there a process in Rhode Island somewhere?
Yeah. So in Rhode Island, basically Massachusetts and Rhode Island have had bills that would legalize this effectively for communities and potentially help fund them. Rhode Island passed their bill. Massachusetts has not. So we are pushing forward on trying to make sure that this can happen here and that we will have the backing of our state, especially as the federal government is shifting its perspective on this and understanding more that this is a life-saving measure, a public health measure, and not an attempt to enable or just be excessively permissive of illegal drug use.
So Jake Wilson was on this show a little while ago, and he explained that each city councilor came up with a list of priorities. And then you guys all got together and you had, is this right? A single list that then sent to the mayor, which is very unusual and different. And because it's a strong mayor form of government, and in the budget, the council can remove but not add items once the budget as a whole is presented. So was this, and I guess I should have asked this for the mental health services as well. Were these among your priorities individually? And how many of them made it into the sort of the group list?
Yeah, so I can definitely say that I put up items around mental health and supervised consumption side especially. And I just anecdotally from conversations I've had and from looking at positions my colleagues have taken, supervised consumption sites have a broad well of support on the council, in my view. If we got a vote tomorrow that says, are we going to do this? I 100% believe we would pass it. The issue we have coming forward, as you mentioned, is that we don't actually allocate funding, the mayor does. And so for something like this, where we're going to need an infusion of cash to set this up, less than I think a lot of people might think, actually.
How much,
but
do you have any sense of that?
As an estimate, around $1 million. But in the scope of what we're talking about in our budget, we just got it yesterday, really, and it's about $309 million. It's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. So what was, I mean, maybe it doesn't matter so much, but was there a specific type of service or a specific number of sites, or was anything like that specified in the list that went to the mayor from the council? Or was it more general? For
a supervised consumption site?
Yes.
No, there was not specific, and that's on purpose. I have the pleasure of actually serving on the supervised consumption site committee, which is a subcommittee of the council now. And so I get the chance to have multiple meetings a week with folks who are health experts, who are drug users, who are doing the work of talking to the community. They just had a forum yesterday about this, and we are systematically pinpointing sites that we could actually use here. We're trying to make it a municipally owned space because there are some legal hurdles, but we are coming up with a spot to put it very soon.
Pardon?
We are coming up with a spot to put this very soon that we can present to the mayor in a new report that we hope to get out this year. Okay,
so that's moving forward. So I was actually going to ask you, I knew about the meeting. Did anything happen there that moved the process along or that struck you as different, or what?
Yeah, I think anytime we get the chance to talk about these really difficult issues, whether it's suicide prevention or drug use and stopping overdoses, we push it forward because, as you know, there are many views when it comes to how we should respond to the opioid crisis. And there are many fears amongst people. Some I think are legitimate and some I think are, the product of a long history in this country based on the war on drugs. But when we get to have these conversations, we actually reduce the backlash to a site like this, which allows us to do what I think is the most important work, which is save people's lives. Because if we can do this, that will be the ultimate effect.
Well, I think anytime you explain something to people who don't know what something is or are scared of it, then at least they're focusing on whatever the reality is versus their fears of it. And that's why I wanted you to explain it, even though I think a lot of people know what it is, because more is better, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to talk about Defund Somerville Police. So you co-founded this group, is that right?
Yep.
Was it 2020? Yeah. So can you explain exactly what the goal is of the group?
Yes, and I helped write its mission statement, so I hope I can. It's been a little while. I've been busy doing some.
Well, I read the website, but I want to hear it from the source, kind of thing.
Yes, of course. So Defund SPD is an abolitionist organization with the goal of transforming public safety. And ultimately, the goal of abolition is the eradication of violence itself, it's particularly state-sanctioned violence. So what we're trying to do is to create alternative forms of public safety that are less reliant on incarceration and the potential use of deadly weapons, and instead are more peer focused, more focused around healing and restorative justice. So centering people who are on the receiving end of violence and what they like to see the process play out as. And so what we're trying to do is create an alternative pathways for safety and justice that are not as baked into a retributive and punitive system.
So I just don't know, I'm focused too much maybe on the word. So defund to me means no money, no personnel, no nothing. So is that what it is? Or is it more, as some other city councilors have talked about, reform, which is what to me is what you described, which is shifting resources, shifting focus, shifting training perhaps, which in some cases might cost more money because.
Well, it's definitely not shifting training. This defund's role is not the police just need to be better trained.
Right.
And it's, as far as I'm concerned, we look at this from a very pragmatic standpoint, which is that conversations about policing in this country and how policing has been bad in this country have been going on as long as there have been police in this country, which Boston was the first public full-time police department. So we have a particularly deep history of it here in Massachusetts. But they were having conversations about, oh, they just need better training 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. In the shooting that happened in Texas, which was horrific, the police there had school shooter training. That city spends 40% of its budget on police. It's not.
And they didn't go in. And they didn't go in.
They didn't go in.
Yeah.
The issues that we see when it comes to how do you create safety, real safety in communities, are not solved by policing. Policing by its very nature is reactionary and doesn't stop the violence. What defund is about is figuring out how can we move our money in such a way that it reduces the chance for police violence, which only happens if police are in a situation. And then secondly, stops the violence from happening in the first place.
So I think there are levels of this I don't grasp. And maybe that's just a question of hearing this again and again. But how is that done? I mean, actually, let's get it. I have a specific example, I guess. So at the high school recently, there was that incident where there was a policeman and a student, and it wasn't even the student for whom action was perceived to be needed, but the policeman said, move back. The student did not move back. And then there
he did move back. The initial police report said that he did move back, but then even with that, there was a confrontation.
Right. There was a
subsequent reporting changed that, and I don't understand why that happened, actually.
Okay. Well, thank you for correcting that. So then there was a quote unquote scuffle, according to some reports. But I saw on Facebook from a parent I know who said that the parent's child was watching this, presumably from inside the building or something, and said scuffle did not cover it. It was a much more harmful, violent, or whatever act. So, and then other people said, oh, well, you should say this. You should say this publicly, or you should tell someone. And this parent was like, no, I can't do that. Clearly afraid to even bring it up. So there's more than one level to this, obviously. So, and then it got resolved, I believe, by a school personnel getting in the middle. And that's not what they should be doing, really.
And to the point about training, Somerville Police, and I know this because I helped lead these conversations in 2020, as we talked about earlier. Somerville Police Department has had de-escalation training. They have boasted in budget conversations in the past that, they're one of the best, police departments in the state, and they're well
So
awarded.
So how does one city or one person, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to say, oh, you have to solve this whole thing that's taken a century for people to even recognize maybe, but are there things that
Yeah.
you would like to see specifically happen to
Yes, absolutely.
make that
And
easier?
last point on that very specific situation, because I've talked to Chair Andre Green about it specifically and gotten some details about it. I think on a base level, people in Somerville recognize that a grown adult man fighting a child is never okay.
Right.
And to reduce it down to, oh, there was a scuffle that broke out between a person with a gun and someone who was unarmed is very dangerous, and it kind of it fits a pattern of how we talk about police violence in this country.
It's by definition dangerous. My
Yes.
son went to Somerville High School. So when I project that situation, I mean, it scares the, expletive deleted word out of me
Yeah. So this is the point about defund SBD. The fastest way to stop police violence in a situation like that is for the police to have not been there in the first place. Now, I understand there were reasons why the police were called. Whether they should have been on the campus itself is one other question, but there was a host of ways that could have been resolved without the police. If the schools had funding for transport for the child who was being transported by the police carrier in the first place, that could have been an easier alternative than having what, from a student perspective, probably looked like a child being arrested in front of them, which is also concerning. So it's about how do we put our resources to solve these problems before we need to call in an entity or an institution that only has a few recourses for any action, which include incarceration or use of a weapon primarily. And I believe that there are elements of reform here, but I think it goes beyond that, because what it means is we have to reimagine the way that we are solving our issues and how we believe justice is formated in our community.
I think we're going to have to I think we will have to stop very soon. Is there any sort of announcement, or I think we're going to be putting up some info on the screen, or was there something you wanted to announce or a meeting?
Yes, I do. Just because it is the second day of Pride Month, and I am in the process of working on an ordinance right now, my third ordinance, if I pass it, and it will actually, related to the police, it will prohibit the police in Somerville from complying with any out-of-state law enforcement requests that relate to these transphobic laws that have been passed in a lot of states that say, if you allow your child to get gender affirming healthcare, then you're a child abuser and we're going to throw you in jail. And it also would ban them from complying with any of those in relation to abortion care. So we're going to try to make sure that Somerville, as much as possible, is standing up to these bigoted body control laws and actually providing safe haven as much as we possibly can to those folks who need that for their own lives.
All right. Well, that's a lot of things to do, but covering a lot of needs. So thank you for making sure we heard that. So this has been City Council Spotlight with Willie Burnley Jr. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.